The World Health Organization selects Taiwan's Medigen vaccine for international trials. Could this pave the way for international approval? It's time to back Taiwan's participation in the UN. That's the message from US Secretary of State Anthony Blinken. Current pledges are not enough. The UN warns the world is hurtling towards climate disaster. And now you see it, now you don't. The mystery of the pop-up temple. A warm welcome to TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. Taiwan's homegrown COVID vaccine, Medigen, is set to enter clinical trials under a WHO platform. The government hopes this could pave the way for greater international recognition of the vaccine. Sandy Chi has more.
Taiwan's first locally produced vaccine, Medigen, has been chosen to take part in the WHO Solidarity Trial Vaccines platform. It is an international randomized clinical trial platform designed to rapidly evaluate the efficacy and safety of promising vaccines. The vaccines in the trial were selected by an independent advisory group. Around 20 candidate vaccines were reviewed, and 2 are set to proceed to clinical trials. One is Medigen, the other is from the US biotech company Inovio. More could be added to the platform later this year and next. Medigen is already undergoing phase 3 clinical trials in Paraguay. As of October 20th, nearly 100 subjects have received the first dose.
Well, I think, again, by end of the year, we will have all the results. Everything goes very smoothly so far, yes.
Over 600,000 people in Taiwan have been fully vaccinated with Medigen, including President Tsai Ing-wen. But it still only accounts for some 6% of the vaccines that have been administered in the country. Asnaya Zhou and Sandy Chi for TaiwanPlus.
A Chinese attack helicopter was in the latest group of military aircraft which entered Taiwan's air defense zone on Tuesday. It is the first time such a vehicle is known to have taken part in a Chinese incursion. The evening sortie totaled 7 Chinese aircraft, including one Soviet-designed Mi-17 helicopter and one Chinese-designed WZ-10 attack helicopter. The WZ-10 was developed for anti-tank warfare. In the past week, there has only been 1 day without Chinese aircraft entering Taiwan's air defense zone. I spoke to Adrian Ang, a research fellow at the S. Rajaratnam School of International Studies. He told me China's incursions are a warning to both the US and Taiwan.
China has multiple reasons for sending sorties into Taiwan's ADIZ. One reason is the PLA is using those as training exercises. It also uses those sorties to monitor submarine activity in the strategic Bashi Channel. It uses the sorties as a show of force against US naval presence in the region, particularly when US carrier strike groups are known to be in the region. And Beijing also uses these incursions as a diplomatic signal to Washington to show its disapproval of closer Taiwanese-US relations.
The message that it's sending to the US, what exactly is that message?
I think that the message that Beijing is generally sending to Washington is that it has to abide by the one China principle, that the US should preserve the status quo and it should not move towards recognizing anything that resembles Taiwanese independence.
What sort of actions then do trigger these sorts of incursions?
Right, sort of our analysis of the incursions data suggests that large-scale incursions are basically triggered by 2 things. One would be high-level diplomatic contact between the United States and Taiwan, as well as US naval presence in the region, again, particularly US carrier strike groups. The formations that the PLA uses appear to be sort of a to simulate a maritime strike, right, as a show of force against the U.S. Navy.
In an article that you wrote for The Diplomat, you talked about China creating a new normal. Can you explain this to us a little bit more?
Right. I think what we're trying to say is China is attempting to normalize its behavior in terms of these incursions.
China has hit back at comments made by US Secretary of State calling on all UN member states to support Taiwan's participation in the global body. The state-run Global Times called Anthony Blinken's statement a gross escalation, undermining Beijing's One China principle. Blinken said that Taiwan's exclusion from the UN undermines the important work of the bloc. He noted that although millions of passengers transit through its airports, Taiwan is not represented at the International Civil Aviation Organization. And despite its excellent handling of the COVID-19 pandemic, Taiwan was shut out of the World Health Assembly. Both organizations are specialized agencies of the UN. His remarks were welcomed by Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen, who said Taiwan stands ready to work with like-minded partners. International relations expert Sensei Hofstede explains how other countries can pave the way for Taiwan to participate on an international stage.
I think the first task would be to correct the record, so to say. There's a tendency in Beijing to try to read language into the UN General Assembly Resolution 2758 that is not there. There's a tendency among both Chinese officials and some UN officials to proclaim a one China policy in the UN that is not there either. And so the member states that are not in agreement with this could and should speak up to dispute these claims.
US President Joe Biden has announced a $100 million spending plan intended to deepen America's relationship with the Association of Southeast Asian Nations. At a virtual summit held with ASEAN leaders on Tuesday, Biden said the money would go toward new climate, health, economic and education programs. It is the first time in 4 years that a US president has taken part in an ASEAN meeting. The US is looking to strengthen its presence in the region and sees the group as key in its efforts to counter an increasingly assertive China. Canada's Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has carried out a major cabinet reshuffle. Like all of Trudeau's cabinet since he took office, the new appointments are gender balanced. They include Canada's second ever female defence minister and new ministers for foreign affairs and the environment. One of the big questions the new cabinet will face is how to balance relations with China and Taiwan. The Chinese embassy in Ottawa has warned Canadians to stop expressing mistaken views on Taiwan after a call in the Canadian press to strengthen ties with the democratic nation. Our reporter Ryan Ho-Kilpatrick spoke with Scott Simon at the University of Ottawa. He began by asking him why Canada, a Pacific nation, has not taken a greater role in the region.
First of all, there are certain forces within Canada that are much more short-sighted in terms of the immediate business profits to be made in China, and have been a bit overly optimistic about the possibility that China will evolve into a country that abides by international rule of law and human rights and democracy. Also is that these days Canada is being much more inward turning. It's difficult to get Canadians, including policymakers and politicians, really to turn their eyes across the Pacific. Well, it's very clear that the public sentiment in Canada has turned quite a bit against the current regime in China.
What kind of role do you think Canada can play in terms of deterrence of a conflict over the Taiwan Strait? Do you see a part for Canada in alliances such as AUKUS or a Quad Plus framework or something else?
One thing that people have been saying is that Canada can't deter a war. Well, that's true that Canada cannot deter a war, but that's not the purpose for Canada alone to go and deter war. It's that it's unity among like-minded partners that will deter war with China, and that's where Canada can play a role. Supporting the entry of Taiwan into international organizations, making public statements that using coercion to solve differences between China and Taiwan is unacceptable. So things like that are very good. And using the word Taiwan in relations with Taiwan. And so maybe having a Taiwan representative office. These are all good things. I think that Canada, as part of the CPTPP, can do something there as well. You know, Taiwan is an independent and sovereign country. It's within that one China policy of ours, which is independent from China's one China principle. We have a lot of leeway in which we can have relationships with Taiwan and encourage peace in the region. And then hopefully one day the people of Taiwan themselves will make decisions about their own future.
Coming up after the break, Taiwan's military unveils the suit that gives wearers superpowers. Back in a moment. Welcome back. You're watching TaiwanPlus News. A reminder of our top story. Taiwan's COVID vaccine Medigen has been chosen for an international clinical trial platform co-launched by the WHO. In a rare public speech overseas, Taiwan's Foreign Minister Joseph Wu has said authoritarian states are using the COVID pandemic to discredit democracy. Wu was speaking in Slovakia. He is on a two-nation trip to Europe aimed at boosting trade and investment. He will also visit the Czech Republic. The Foreign Minister told a conference hosted by a Slovakia-based think tank that Taiwan has been on the front lines of defending democracy for decades.
Throughout the outbreak, authoritarian states have continued to discredit democratic governments through disinformation campaign, spreading rhetoric that democracy is an ineffective form of governance in face of major challenge like COVID. And back in Taiwan, we have noticed the alarming increase of military exercises, hybrid and cognitive warfare operations aiming to put our democracy under acute threat.
A giant F for fail. That's the message from the United Nations to G20 countries on their climate plans. A new UN report says that the promises being made fall well short of what's needed and will still lead to a catastrophic global temperature rise. James Chater has the story.
Just days before the COP26 climate conference in Glasgow, a damning criticism of current efforts to limit climate change. A UN report predicts that current emissions pledges for 2030 will still result in a 2.7 degrees Celsius temperature rise by the year 2100. Such a rise is likely to have a devastating environmental impact, one that many experts predict would be irreversible.
As world leaders prepare for COP26, this report is so another thundering wake-up call. How many more do we need?
The report also says that updated pledges to reduce greenhouse gas emissions would take just 7.5% off projected 2030 emissions. A 55% reduction is needed if the world is to limit warming to even the 1.5 degree rise set in the Paris Climate Accord.
As the report demonstrates, the world would need 7 times more ambition to keep us on the 1.5 degree track. And this is a yawning gap that we must close in 8 years.
The report comes on the same day that Australia announced new commitments on greenhouse emissions. Australia's Prime Minister Scott Morrison pledged to reach net zero greenhouse emissions by 2050, a promise previously absent from his election manifesto. But despite the dire warning in the UN report, Morrison said Australia would not budge on a commitment to reduce emissions by only 26% before 2030. Fossil fuels account for around 90% of Australia's current energy mix.
Australians want action on climate change. They're taking action on climate change. But they also want to protect their jobs and their livelihoods. They also want to keep the costs of living down. And they also want to protect the Australian way of life, especially in rural and regional areas.
Saudi Arabia announced last weekend that it would reach net zero by 2060. But to the dismay of environmentalists, it, along with Australia, has said they will continue to mine coal and oil, the lifeblood of their economies. Australia and Saudi Arabia are both members of the G20. In the UN General Assembly Hall on Tuesday, Secretary-General Antonio Guterres delivered a blunt warning to the group.
G20 leaders in particular need to deliver. The time has passed for diplomatic niceties. If governments, especially G20 governments, do not stand up and lead this effort, we are headed for terrible human suffering.
COP26 is set to begin on Sunday, but the latest UN report is yet another reminder of the vast challenges that lie ahead. Chris Ma and James Chater for TaiwanPlus.
Taiwan's military has unveiled a battery-powered exoskeleton suit that boosts the strength and endurance of soldiers. Weighing in at 10 kilograms, the suit takes less than a minute to put on and gives its wearer the ability to move at 6 kilometers an hour. The suit also makes it easier to squat and kneel. The exoskeleton has been designed for use in war and post-disaster relief. It's hoped that by the end of the 4-year project, those wearing it will be able to carry a maximum load of 100 kilograms. Protests against the military's takeover in Sudan are continuing. At least 10 protesters are believed to have died and over 100 injured in clashes with the military. In his first appearance since taking over, General Abdel Fattah Burhan said he removed the government and seized power only to prevent civil war. Deposed Prime Minister Abdallah Hamdok has been allowed to return to his home but remains under heavy security, according to a statement from his office. In Haiti, gangs have blocked access to urgently needed fuel supplies and are demanding the resignation of the country's prime minister. Normally busy streets are empty as vehicles have no gas and businesses have closed. Hospitals that rely on generators are without power and are turning people away. Gang leader Jimmy Barbecue Cherizier says he will grant immediate access to ports holding fuel if Prime Minister Ariel Henry resigns. Haiti has been in a state of crisis since the assassination of the country's president in July, followed by a major earthquake in August. An expert panel has voted to recommend the US Food and Drug Administration authorize the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for children aged 5 to 11, saying the benefits of the shot outweigh the risks. Young children will be given just 1/3 of the dose for teens and adults. The FDA isn't bound by the recommendation and is expected to make its own decision within days. Shots could begin as early as next week if regulators agree. Imagine if overnight a temple was magically constructed right next to where you live. Now what if, just like a food stall, it was packed up and moved across the city? One family in Taiwan has figured out exactly how to do that.
以前盖庙是先把一些石头、木头都载到庙里面，就看庙这一次需要怎么样的东西，他们就现场在那边雕塑。 这样子盖一座庙要很久。啊，后来我爸爸自己出来创业，就把它改成模具化。
做愈花草愈多，表示师傅技术愈悬。较早起的庙啊、细间啊，拢起袂水，因为技术悬，拢是去找的人请去做大间的啦。
他就刚刚好，就把他以前所学的那么大型的庙，就刚好用在我们的小庙身上。所以有很多的顾客，他们就说：“你们的庙太棒了，大庙有的设备，我们小庙通通有。”
咱制作物件的人，有人爱要欣赏，咱是五欢喜的。咱做大间的艺术惯势啊，送来做细间啊，做比大间的较水，古早式的保留掉啊，继续在做。
他时常说，他背书包的第一天，那个炸弹就掉下来了，所以他就没有机会去读书嘛，啊，所以他就很认命的，就是把手艺学好。他的口碑本来就很好，像那个大家记忆中的那个龙虎塔。
迄阵兄弟啊合作啦，兼有这一部分的工课啦，这个美术方面、艺术的方面，我负责较多啊。较早我若要做一件工课，就一支笔刻咧，豆豆啊去画，豆豆啊去想，豆豆啊去完成这个工课出来，搭落去做。即摆少年的时代啊，无共啊，这个孙啊。大学毕业、硕士毕业，就拢来斗相共啊。
当然还有很多的事情，我一个人绝对是扛不起来的。子女就说：“当然啦，要去帮别人赚钱，为什么不回来帮阿公赚钱？”哦，听了这句话，我真的超感动。
因为我刚毕业的时候，其实有回来公司服务一阵子，那我就后来想说，其实也有点想要再深造一下，所以就有到澳洲是念广告的一个策略。回来的时候就想说啊，刚好就是家里这边也需要一些人员在行销这边去做推广，渐渐的开始有国外的市场进来，刚好我就是接这一块的业务。
这些小的看姐姐哥哥都回来帮忙了，哎，他们也都回来帮忙了。4代了，大家都回来帮阿公的忙。台湾在庙宇这一块其实是有它的市场，像我们村就好了，要有一个祖庙，有个妈祖庙、土地公庙，还有其他的小阴庙，就一个小小的村庄哦，平均起来都一定有4、5座的以上的大大小小的庙。还有一块我们都没有去想到的一块，就是在都市里面的工业区，比乡下的那个乡村的那个密集度还更高。自己的一座工厂就有一个土地公庙。
景气好跟不好，大家都会想要拜拜，去求个平安或是求财。那我们后来去分析，我们就集中在中小型的庙宇，然后又是金字塔顶端的人，他们到最后想要追求的可能就是精神上的寄托，在这一块上面其实蛮有商机的。主要我们一天如果小座的庙都载满的话，应该是可以到7、8座的庙一起出去都没问题。小座的，
我爸他做事情他是蛮严谨的，做错的地方打掉。他对产品的执着，产品一定要做好，否则不能出门。大的最重要是如何的控制在这个路上跑，它的结构它耐震吗？这条路可以进得去吗？还有组装的时间尽量要缩短。
整个运送的过程，即便放在很低的板车上面了，但是出去都一定要有一个大概4.5米的一个高度限制。所以在整个运送过程中，比较难的就是可能前置我们都一定要先去看好，因为我们曾经也有勾过人家电线，然后整支电线杆倒下来的。那我们通常是都会请专业的一个运送公司在运送啊，像他们都会去就是申请路权，然后去开道，它有点像古时候的镖局。压标帮我们把东西顺利的送到现场。我们到现场是负责地板以上的工作，我们帮他安装好之后，我们公司的工作就1天就可以完成。 以前会比较身在福中不知福的感觉，那其实有到外面去过，然后回来就会觉得这一切其实是很棒的这样子，所以会更珍惜可以陪伴家人啊。
我若搭工厂，老伙仔工，今年83，我就做袂先，做惯势我真嘛是咧研发，直直咧做，都像这人像迄人，我甲阮孙仔讲讲若食到82岁，要当我做红我嘛要搁做咱这个文化，该留在这个世间。
这是我阿公跟我阿嬷的一个名字，我们一定要继续把它留下来，让它这个事业，让这个传说就这样子传下来。
Peru has built a park using more than 5,000 melted firearms seized by the Peruvian government. Lima locals, along with the government's Firearms Control Office, led the initiative to build the playground with seesaws, monkey bars, swings and exercise machines. A local steel company melted down the weapons and repurposed them into a place for children to have fun. Locals hope the initiative will prevent crime and help the community. Thanks for watching TaiwanPlus News. I'm Yin Khvat. We leave you with some images of a rescued tiger from Ukraine after he finally found a new home in the Netherlands. Stay safe and see you next time.